Hello and welcome to For Every Response, the podcast from Emergency Services Times. I'm Catherine Levin and I'm the editor of Emergency Services Times. In between seasons, we are delighted to bring you our webinars as pod episodes. I spoke to Matt England and Chris Dingle from the National JESIP team on the 22nd of January. We talked about a wide range of topics, including communications, learning from incidents, and how the Joint Emergency Services Interoperability Principles, JESIP, embraces all organisations in our world. We have edited the webinar recording slightly so that it works better for this format. And while you can't be part of the Q&A, you'll find some great wisdom in this conversation. Let's start by introducing the panel. I'm delighted to introduce Matt England and Chris Dingle. Matt is the head of the National JESIP team and Chris is the JESIP delivery manager. Welcome to you both.
Afternoon.
So let's start off with finding a little bit about you. So I know that you're both new in your roles relatively, and we'd like to find out a little bit about where you've come from and what brought you into the team that's brought you out of your day jobs to join this national project. So Matt, can I come to you first?
Thanks, Catherine. Yeah, hi. I'm a nurse and paramedic by background. I've got about 32 years in the NHS and a couple of years overseas experience. Came to the team because I'm passionate about multi-agency working, interoperability working, and doing the best thing for our public and patients.
Brilliant. And Chris?
Yeah, so thank you for having us. I am civilian staff and came from Surrey and Sussex Police. I spent most of my time either working in control rooms or doing emergency and contingency planning. And again, much like Matt, a lot of my work is focused on working with other people. And I really believe in making this as good as it can because it makes such an important difference.
So how fascinating. You come from very different parts of the emergency services world. Is it just the two of you? Do you have other people working with you?
So we have a team. There's around about 8 of us in the team, along with our associates. So we have comms and engagement lead. We have police officers, various roles. So I have a police practitioner. I have a police officer doing transformation for us. And there was a couple of fire officers in our practitioner team and a paramedic in our practitioner team, along with our wonderful business support officer who comes from a police background as well, Katie, who keeps us all in line.
Excellent. That's everybody needs someone to keep them in line. Good to hear. So let's talk about JESIP then. I'm assuming that the people who've joined us today, we have 428 people registered to watch this webinar today. And I just wondered if we could give them a quick elevator pitch. So tell me about JESIP in a nutshell so that we can then carry on with our conversation and answer some of these questions. So what is this all about, Matt? Give us the quick elevator pitch.
The JESIP is all about, as it says in the middle of the joint decision model, working together, saving lives and reducing harm. And that can be at an incident, before an incident, planning events, all sorts of things. So it's a good set of methodologies that come together that should, if they're applied correctly and at the right time, bring about success in either a response or the way events and other exercises and things go. So it's a tried and trusted methodology, but we're constantly doing research and other activities to test things like the level of embeddedness and engagement with JESIP. And we know we've had times where JESIP hasn't worked well, but we've also got lots of times where JESIP's worked really well. And we know that it's a good methodology to make your event run and make sure that you work really, really well with partners, not just blue light partners as well, partners around the whole range of Category 1, Category 2 responders, volunteers, military. Anybody that's going to come along to your response should be included.
Okay, so the breadth is clear there. The origins, I believe, came from 7/7, originally 2005, the original thinking about this. So we're 20. Right.
That was one of a number of the precursors, and it's developed over time. And of course, the most significant, probably sort of poignant moment in more recent times would have been the Manchester Arena bombing and the subsequent inquiry. But there have been, if you look back to the Pollock report, identified this is not an issue that's new. It's a perennial issue, and it's something we need to continue to work out to make sure that JESIP is embedded, because it does make a difference.
the same problems arise again and again, communication, co-location, all those things. And that's what we're really working hard to make sure that all those things aren't repeated. So lessons identified actually really do become lessons learned.
Yeah, and I think that's sort of the interest in this today suggests that people are still learning. It is still embedding. It isn't just, it's all sorted. So something for us to learn today. So let's get into it. So Chris and I were having a chat last week when we were briefing for this, and he was telling me about an exercise that he went to the Channel Tunnel. And I just wondered if, now that you're going out and about with your JESIP hat on as national, is it what you expected to see? So Chris, you might not be specific perhaps about the Channel Tunnel, but generally on your visits, are you seeing JESIP in action? Does it look like what you expected?
I think in general terms, if you look at the sort of the command level or the specialist functions, JESIP's pretty well embedded there, and the application is clearly evidenced there. Where I think, and this is borne out by my own experience from my time in policing, and I think Matt would agree is something that we see elsewhere, is that how well JESIP translates through to the first responder is an area that we need to continue to push with. Fire service, for example, we know do this quite well, but every time a fire pump goes out, there is generally an officer on board who has had enhanced levels of training around JESIP, and their application is really good. Whereas if you're a police officer or a paramedic or from another agency where perhaps you've not had the same level of input, the level of embeddedness is not as strong. So that's probably my takeaway, but that's only from a few weeks into this post. But it bears on my own previous experience.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting that someone's asking the question here about, we don't know anyone who's anti-JESIP, but how do we make people more pro-JESIP? But that suggests to me that people perhaps not are enough something in the middle. They're not either, because they're not getting the training.
Yeah.
So Chris, what you're saying is around that it's great at the incident level, commander level, but not at the troops level, I suppose, the frontline firefighters, paramedics, police officers. Matt, would you agree with that?
Yeah, and I think our work is, I'd hate to feel that anybody was anti-JESIP. I think what we've got to do is get more people more familiar with JESIP. And I think my views on looking at that is that we need to look at different ways of getting many more people involved. And it's really, really difficult to abstract people from the front line. You just can't take paramedics, police officers, firefighters off the front line to give them large amounts of training. What we need to do, though, is make our products available. And this is a hopeless plug for our app. Really easy use. Download our app. Look at our self-teaching tools. Look at our JESIP in a minute videos. They literally take a minute to familiarize yourself with some of the products. Get those out and make sure that people are aware of those, and just encourage it and say to people, this needs to be muscle memory. This needs to be every time you come into contact with another agency as part of your role, think about, do I need to do some JESIP work here? So, paramedics and police officers work hand in glove all the time. Do we need to use the JDM here? Do we need to, think, how do I make my messaging clearer when I'm sending an incident report back? We'll use the ethane mnemonic. It's not just for major incidents. And JESIP is that big thing. We're not just there for that big major incidents. We're there for every time you need to work together with a partner agency to resolve an issue.
Okay, so you have fallen down the acronym hole. So JDM, can you explain that to us, please?
The joint decision model. So again, it's on our agreed lexicon. So it's the joint decision-making model, which we say we spin the wheel of it to go around. And anybody can use that. You can use it. It's on the AIB memoir. It's on the app. To go around, and it asks pertinent questions and prompts you to have a conversation in a bit more of a structured way than anybody else.
Right. And you said ethane, but which you often think is methane. So can you just give us a very quick...
ethane is simply the methane without the M. And it's a way of sending a message about describing your incident without declaring the major incident. So you can knock this. So it should be M/ethane is what we should all be saying. But we're all creatures of short habits, so we knock that slash off, so it becomes methane. And anybody can send those.
Now, so we're going to look at a question we've got in advance. We're going to carry on this conversation from Andrew Brown from Cambridge and Hertfordshire Police. He asks, is there any national data to show how the use of JESIP and methane has improved response to incidents and major incidents. So how do we know it works?
So we're engaged on a really big assurance program, and we're visiting every single police, fire and ambulance service in England and Wales and the Isles. We're doing a peer review process with them, and that gives us lots of information. And we go in and we do go and see different responders, commanders, trainers, strategic leads, and that allows us to gauge levels of engagement, looking at things like JESIP and JESIP as a whole and methane, other messaging, and just generally how JESIP is working. And that's really, really giving us a good temperature check of England and Wales and Northern Ireland as well around how well things are coming. And we'll be reporting that back to our interoperability board regularly to see where we need to improve. And that will advise our strategy about how we go about making it even more successful.
Okay. We have a question here from Elizabeth, who asks, is there any update on when the new JESIP package is being released to enable updated training sessions? So you've talked a bit there we talked about an app earlier and some other bits and bobs around what's available, but this training package, is that something that people should be aware of? What are you up to with that?
Yes. So the current training packages all still out there and are all current. We are actually next week, we're having a intensive workshop being led by one of my staff and being housed to the College of Policing to revise the trainers package. So everybody out there who's a registered trainer with us will be surely getting updated. We hope to have that out by the end of this financial year for general release, sort of April time. So there's a bit of work to do on just updating a few things on that, and then that will be out shortly.
Brilliant. I can see in the questions there are lots and lots of what's about the scope of JESIP and it going beyond police, fire and ambulance. I'd just like to reassure people that we will get to that, but we are not going to get to it just yet. So I'm not going to answer those questions right now, but I am going to move us on to communications because it keeps popping up, this word communications, when it comes to JESIP. So let me come to you, Chris, in terms of the broad question. So Colin Smart from TSG Associates asks us, how can JESIP assist communications in major incidents? You've made a few references, but if you're going to be touting JESIP as the way to do things, how is it going to help you? How is it going to assist communications?
So there's a few things there. I mean, I think, and I'm going to shamelessly plagiarise an analogy that one of our associates used with some of our visits recently. But if you look at an emergency response, every service that's responding will have their own way of approaching that through their own lens, and they will refer to things, as we've already talked about here, with acronyms that probably won't necessarily make much sense to those that are not initiated from their service. And police will speak police, fire will speak fire, ambulance will speak ambulance. And what we should all be doing is speaking JESIP. Resolves the issue with misunderstanding, with not having that shared situational awareness of what's going on and understanding the risks that you're facing. So the key things about the doctrine really is it's meant to be getting everybody to work together in a collaborative way and effectively communicate. And that means using plain language, not using jargon, and making sure that you're sharing information effectively. And again, if you look at where things haven't worked when it's come out of inquiries, it's generally been because people haven't been sharing information effectively or haven't understood the information that was being shared. So that's why it's particularly important.
So does that mean shared understanding of all these acronyms? Is that what that boils down to?
Well, that's, if you don't use the acronym and you just say, Matt was giving an example earlier about if you say I've got 100 patients who need TXA to go to an NTC, well, that might mean something in the health world. In my background in policing, I might not understand that well. Whereas if he turns around and says I've got 100 patients who need tranexamic acid and need to go to a major trauma centre, that's much more intelligible to somebody who's not a specialist in that function.
Okay. So that goes just nicely onto a question here from Kev Topping, who is from Lancashire County Council. I'm thinking he's from the LRF, another acronym, Local Resilience Forum. Who asks, is the JESIP team looking at offering best practice of guidance around modernising multi-agency call cascades to make sure methane can be issued simultaneously? Now, first of all, can we explain what a call cascade is, and then can you answer the right question? So, Matt, let's come to you.
Yeah, thanks, Catherine. Yeah, so call cascading was the effect of getting the message out across agencies or individuals and organisations. Normally starts with one person phones to the other person below them, would phone to. But now we've got IT systems that will do that. I'm not going to name any of the individual IT systems that are available, but suffice to say there are quite a few out there, and they're very well known. And what I would say is that if any of those systems don't include the ability to incorporate a methane message, then I wouldn't be using them, because the whole point of it is to get as much information out in as succinct a way possible. And certainly I'm aware that those media are the way to easily put in the contents of a methane message into that and then ping it out, and you can hit, rather than taking 20 minutes to phone 100 people, you can get to 100, 200, 300 people in 20 seconds. So yeah, definitely I would say that's it. It's not for us to advocate an individual system. It's for us to advocate the principles of any system that should be considered, really.
Yeah. So Kev's question is around offering best practice and guidance for modernising the cascades. Are you saying that the principles are sound?
I think the principles are sound, is that you still need to do that, those arrangements. Who needs to know? When do they need to know? What do they need to know? And the who and when has to be very much tailored for the local area and the local arrangements, but the what can be well covered off with the use of the methane mnemonic.
Yeah. And then there's another question here from Will, who asks, how can teams leverage tech to encourage interoperability through the JESIP model? So you mentioned there that there are tech solutions to call cascades, but there'll be tech solutions in other aspects of working. So how can they do that?
So tech solutions are there. So again, sorry, plugging our app, but you can text and you can email your methane and other things to relevant people from that. And I think the other thing around tech is where we talk about co-location, that may be physical over the bonnet of a response car, etc., or it can be virtual, Teams, Zoom, whatever your choice of media is. So that's an example of tech. I think, say, sharing any of your briefings, sharing your methane messaging, your iMarch messaging in appropriate solutions is there. So that needs to be encouraged, really.
Okay, all right. So one other technology, well, the control room is a hive of technology, isn't it, in all emergency services? And Harrison White from MWAS, so that's the Northwest Ambulance Service, asks us whether there should be a national direction to compel the use of MATE, multi-agency instant transfer protocols, to bring consistency. So when control rooms are talking to each other, not picking up the phone, they're actually sending messages electronically. So you're talking about digital exchange of information. So all around comms in the control room and the incident commanders. Should there be a direction? Should everybody be using MATE? Chris?
In an ideal world, yeah, that would be great. But I think the reality is that there are however many services in the country, probably with all different command and control systems. To get everyone on exactly the same thing is an ambitious aim, and would certainly help. But the sort of bottom line is ultimately it's just a tool that you would have on your belt for sharing information. There are other ways of doing that as well. And there are some services that do have immediate instant transfer. Certainly my old service, Surrey and Sussex, had the ability to pass CADs between each other, and to Kent and British Transport Police and others. Didn't have it with fire, didn't have it with ambulance. Would pick up the phone and call them. Or you'd hail them on the radio. These are all just tools to facilitate that communication. The key thing that's really important is the communication is taking place and that the sharing of the information is happening.
Anything from you on that one, Matt?
Yeah, I think we mustn't lose the human aspect of this as well. I think where you co-locate, I think you co-locate virtually in person, as well as sending that media across, because you need to have that, especially in the early principles of something that is really serious or really hazardous, such as a marauding terrorist attack. You haven't got the time or the bandwidth to just rely on a standard email message or a message like that. You need to get on and have those conversations with your colleagues in other control rooms, on Teams, or whichever media you prefer. But I think it's a useful adjunct, but shouldn't replace the humans in the process.
Yeah.
Yes, and that's like mixed economy you're describing there, isn't it? If you had both, one for speed, one for the humanity of bringing people together to talk and discuss in a way that you wouldn't perhaps send messages. It's interesting. There's a question here from Steve McClendon who asks about data sharing. And about, it says, how JESIP is looking to address data sharing from the start of the incident in one agency to implementing shared JESIP protocols outside of the JESIP app. So if you've got data in one space, how do you move it somewhere else? And where will the security of all this information moving around the place? Matt?
So I think data sharing absolutely really important, especially in the planning phases and things like that. So you really should have data sharing agreements in place, but please don't ever forget that there is quite clear direction around data protection, which says that on occasions in emergency, you need to dare to share. So in slower time event planning or slower time things, you should have your data protection agreements in place across local resilience forums or between emergency services. Where life is at risk or limb is at risk, then the dare to share principle should definitely be used.
Okay, I like that, dare to share. Now, there's the question I was going to put to you on the last of this bit on comms is based on my own experience. So I was lucky enough to go to South Wales a few months ago and watch exercise Tendley 2, which was an amazing exercise around a road traffic accident. It was a big roundabout, loads of people involved, and I watched the JESIP huddles. So I was really intrigued by these huddles of people continually meeting and talking and all of the tabards on their back and everything. And what struck me was they were all doing it differently. So they were all using either paper or a tablet or something. And I just wondered how, when you have those huddles of people who are going through the incident, sharing information, how do they communicate that between each of those huddles and then between their age agencies to create a collective review of the incident, particularly afterwards when you're looking at debriefing? How does that work when they're all using different formats and different media? Chris, can I come to you first and then perhaps to Matt?
So part of the joint decision model, the initial phase is about gathering information, and that is where your methane or ethane would form your structure for your initial information gathering. And as you move through the decision model to then handing that information over, you would then be looking at a briefing tool like March to hand that on. And then in terms of recording the information that's sort of coming out of those meetings and those co-locations, the doctrine covers this off in terms of providing a minimum sort of expected standard, which is that you'll have some form of decision log where you're recording what the decision was, why you've made it, what actions have been taken, and what time and date you did that. We have got on the website our joint decision log, which people can access and make use of. We're also aware that different services have different protocols around recording decision making as well. So provided it meets that minimum standard and it's being done in a consistent way, I think that's the key thing for us, whether that's paper or electronic. It will be specific to the service. From my own experience, there are sometimes issues with using electronic. If you're particularly in a field somewhere and you're trying to record on an electronic decision log, that can be challenging if you haven't got signal. But I suppose the other thing I'd say is that where possible, using a logist to help record those decisions is a really effective thing to do as well.
Interesting to hear the word logist. Matt, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. Using the templates, say your joint methane message as well. So once you've got to an incident and you've probably sent as an individual agency either an ethane or a methane, after that it should be a joint message going back up so that everybody has a common recognised information picture. It really is important because there's nothing worse in a more complex or major incident sitting up a strategic coordinating group and getting 3 different versions or 4 different versions of the truth arrive, because that then shows you that your team on the ground probably getting it together as well as they should. So, that multi-agency methane message, joint methane message is generated so it travels all the way up and gets that message through, so you don't have little break-off messages and you don't start to get those little rumours start running that can often down the response.
Tyler asks a question down here. He, in the same vein of what we've been talking about, he says, is there merit in a single mandatory incident command platform that unifies all emergency services under one shared incident record while remaining fully compliant with JESIP? And that sounds enormous and very expensive, but I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
I think we've tried many times to get everybody on one solution, and I think we probably all agree that one size doesn't always fit everybody. Every area I've gone to has told me so far that they're slightly different from everybody else in different ways. So you've got mountainous regions, so things don't work there. You've got London with a population density, so things don't work there. So I think a local response potentially to national best practice standard is probably the closest we're going to get to that.
All right. So let's move on to learning then. So doing all of this amazing work, responding to incidents, doing training, doing exercising, and somehow you've got to bring all that learning back into the organisation across the sector, and somehow you guys can help with the coordination of that. So let's just understand what the joint organisational learning, how that's going. It's been around for a while. Could you just spell out a little bit about what it is, what the process is, and where you see that going next?
So joint organisational learning is a platform where anybody that's signed up can submit, or any organisation that is signed up can submit episodes of joint organisational learning. And that can be where things have gone well, or it can be where things have gone less well. We should be gripping things that have gone less well and making sure we improve those. But with the same vigour, we should be investigating things that have gone well so that we can share that best practice out around the country. So the joint organisational learning process is undergoing a revamp with my team at the moment, working alongside Zeal Solutions, who are the providers of the software and the system. Lots of work has gone into making sure that the system will be as good as it can be to make it easy to submit a lesson. It will then go through a process and will either be put out as notable practice items, notable practice, organisational learning, or if it's serious enough, an action note. The action notes go up for approval at the Interoperability Board and then published. And as they say, they require organisations involved to take action to change practice or improve practice in order to improve responses. So we currently have 4 action notes live in the UK. So they are CBRN, new ways of responding to a CBRN incident. We have persons in crisis and how to assist persons in crisis in terms of what the best things to say and not say and how to deal with them is. We have a submersion tool, so patients or people that have been seen to submerge as decision-making to help around how you decide where you are in that stage of a rescue or maybe sadly a recovery. And really importantly, we have a rail safety action note that was published, which is around safety for responders when we have to go onto railway tracks, which are incredibly dangerous environments, as you can imagine. So there is the need to make sure that responders who go on are well versed and that JESIP principles are being used to coordinate that response.
Okay, so you kind of slightly stole my question, which was going to ask you about we're always sharing, we're learning from when it doesn't work, but do we actually share when it does work? So you've kind of touched on that. But in terms of those 4 action notes, are any of those based on the fact that something works really well, we've seen it work well, and we're reminding everybody that it works well, or were they all about things which hadn't quite worked well and we need people to change the way that they're doing things?
Some of them, well, most of the action notes are generally around safety and around best practice. So sadly, a couple of years ago, a police officer was hit by a train whilst attempting to respond to somebody on railway tracks and sadly lost their lives. So that is a very important critical safety note for responders to be aware of. The persons in crisis is positive, where the UK hostage negotiator and from the police the organisation in the police have brought out some best practice guidelines from knowing that first responders deal with people in crisis a lot. So now they want to make sure that they've got some training and some baseline training to really help those people without endangering themselves before going onto a scene. So there are lots of good things there. The best practice stuff does come out. Generally, it comes out as notable practice. So where things have gone well, it will be issued as a notable practice.
Okay, well, that's good. And is that all publicly available, or are they just to people who have a login through JESIP, or how does that work?
They come out through JESIP's single points of contact. So each organisation, including LRFs and others, have a single point of contact, and we publish to those single points of contact.
Okay, right. I have a question here related to Joel from Alistair, who asks, are there any improvements for searchability on Joel? Suggests that perhaps that's not working so well. So it's easy enough to submit, but how can you find stuff coming back? The work you've just described, will that improve search for the documentation tool plan?
Yeah.
Yeah. Chris is my techie. I'm going to have to...
Chris, want to just share about
going into another meeting after this on the Joel update, and that's one of there's a range of things that we've tried to address with this. And Chanel, our team leader, has been working really hard on trying to make sure that the improvements that need to be made have been clearly articulated. So we're working really hard to try and make sure that gets rolled out, because we appreciate that having a system like this, if it's really important for the work that it's doing, but it needs to work for the end user. And then we'll be doing some user acceptance testing before we launch. So just to make sure that we've had that sense check.
Good. Okay. Good to know it's going to improve. And in terms of training, so that's about the learning that comes at the one end, but the other end is the training side of it. Just want to pick up a question here from Dean, who asks about getting JESIP training for the threat team within a police service. Talks about, anyway, in terms of training, do you offer that to all elements of police fire ambulance? We'll come on to the non-police fire ambulance in a minute, but can they just get training so that all elements of the staff can know about JESIP? Is that available from you guys?
So we produce the materials, and each organisation has or should have a number of JESIP trainers within. Those JESIP trainers can access that. There's also a lot of resource on our website. So I would point everybody to our website, where we have all staff e-learning, website, training tool. There are a whole plethora of things there, but go to your is it normally your emergency preparedness team or your training teams and ask them about JESIP, and they should have a JESIP trainer who can talk you through everything that you need at your level.
Brilliant. Okay. And it's a bit slightly left field, but I'm going to ask you because I've just spotted it. So Robbie asks, why are you not visiting sites in Scotland? So on your trips when you're going out and about, we talked about training now, we've talked about learning how people put things into the system. But in terms of you two and how you're getting out and about and sharing the love of JESIP, do you have plans to go to Scotland?
So we have been to Scotland. We were in Scotland last spring with my predecessor. Scotland has a slightly different setup with SMART2, which is now you've put me on the spot, is their resilience, Scottish multi-agency resilience training unit. There you go. That's not bad.
That's a new acronym for me. I didn't know that one. So well done.
Absolutely. So SMART2 do that along with each of the Scottish emergency services. However, we have also met with Scottish Government, and we're looking at how we can work much more closely together. But we share all our lessons, we share all our materials, and SMART2 have a seat on our interoperability board and are most welcome partners.
Good. Okay, so we covered off the Scottish question. Now, I have a question here from, another one from Steve, busy asking questions this afternoon, asking about whether, in terms of the Joel solution, whether there's going to be integrating any kind of smart technologies, any kind of AI into it. I mean, AI is in every conversation I have at the moment. So let's just ask it of this one. In terms of, making sense of, because presumably you've collected an awful lot of stuff now, or a lot of information, and wouldn't it be nice to kind of put a kind of fancy layer on the top of it to make more sense of it from an AI point of view? Is that something you're looking at?
So we had our research symposium last week, I think it was now, which was involving a range of academics, practitioners, and industry experts looking at AI and how it can be used to enhance interoperability. So there were a range of things that we were discussing there, and we're looking forward to the learning coming out from that. In terms of Joel specifically, I think there probably would be a space in the future for us to look at whether we can have whether it be AI, machine learning, however you want to refer to it, tool for us to do advanced analysis and perhaps look at some bits It may also form part of the search function in terms of enhancing the searchability of the site, but we don't have concrete plans to be doing. So we're not having some huge behemoth of an AI tool that we're launching with this update, if I can put it that way. It's something we're certainly thinking about, but it's not on the immediate horizon beyond those sort of limited applications I talked about.
Sounds to me like a nice little project for something like the Accelerated Capability Environment and one of these kind of central bodies that are looking at little projects just to see what works where. So maybe somebody from there is watching us this afternoon. Now, I need to bring us on to the elephant in the room and the questions. There's loads of them, and I had loads in advance, and I have been reading about this, which is in terms of your scope. So we've talked a lot about police, fire, ambulance, but of course the emergency services world, as we know, and from the emergency services show, if you ever go there, you'll see how many people come from all across different services, search and rescue, Coast Guard, RNLI. I mean, it's very wide ranging. So the question is, does JESIP apply to those areas, and how do you embrace them in your world? Whereas the question earlier on, which was around why isn't there anybody who's not police, fire and ambulance in your team? So let's sort of get to it then. So what's the scope to start with, Matt? What is JESIP intended for, and how do we ensure it encompasses everybody in our blue light world?
Yeah, so our scope has definitely grown from 12, 14 years ago when my esteemed predecessors, pulled this together, and it very much was that 3-agency focus. But the door should be open to everybody, and where it's trained locally, the door should be open to everybody. If you're involved in a response, then you should be there. So, whilst we say emergency services, I would say if your organisation stops doing something and responds to an incident with short or no notice, then probably you should think of yourself or that element of your organisation as an emergency service. So you should be involved. If you're involved in your local resilience forums, whether you are a Cat 1, Cat 2, military, volunteers, you should be involved in those JESIP processes locally. And if people are having problems engaging locally, or if doors are being shut, then personally I would really like to know about those so that I can take some interest in those and encourage people to make sure that inclusion is there. We are an inclusive team. We've engaged with all sorts of different people, including colleagues that are overseas. And I've seen in the chat there's some overseas colleagues there as well who are adopting the practice, and we're love to speak to those people as well. So, we are absolutely inclusive. If you are involved in a response to incidents to do those things, then you should be working through JESIP. There are obviously things around who funds us. So our funding is Home Office based and comes from the 3 emergency services. So that is where our initial focus will lie. But that doesn't stop us engaging with the wider LRF communities. And I would be concerned that people who feel that they're not being involved by those emergency services or by those LRFs. And if people feel they need to raise that to our team, please drop us a line and we will engage.
Great. Okay, well, that's good that you're open to that. Interesting that you talk about the Home Office sort of funding, but of course there's all the complexity of devolved, because fire funding comes from the centre, which is MHCLG, but it's devolved in Wales, it's devolved in Scotland and in Northern Ireland. So it's kind of, and varies between police and the NHS. So it's quite complex in terms of funding. Do you just get money from Home Office? Did a devolved administration not provide the cash?
No, we are centrally funded by the Home Office on a grant application. We receive around about 60,000 from relevant bodies in police, fire and ambulance only. And that's the funding that we use. So we are always involved in a grant application somewhere is probably the best way to do it. And we're looking at next year's funding now. But so that doesn't mean that we won't look across, and we're acutely aware that Fire and Rescue moved into MHCLG and the changes between NHS England and Department of Health and all those things, but we are carrying on with our message. Doesn't really matter where the pounds are coming in. I'll take the pounds from anywhere. Legal, obviously. But if we will reach out and we will make our products as relevant to as many people as are there. And I've made my local training team and national trainers very aware of that we should be including our colleagues from other agencies and cut to where appropriate in our training.
Okay, so there's a very strong message there around inclusion. Some of my thinking was I read a recent academic paper from Liverpool University, and it was Sarah Waring and Nikki Power and colleagues writing about some research they'd done with around that piece around, is JESIP inclusive? Does it include all of these bodies? And they talked about it limiting engagement and ownership across the wide emergency community. And they talked about inclusiveness. But I think from what you've said there's a very strong message of inclusiveness, and that if people want to talk to you about this, then you're open to that. So I think that's very helpful to hear that from you.
I was very sad when I read that. I'll be honest. That's not the JESIP that I promote. And I've engaged my team as they will individually tell you that they were shared, and we are looking at an action plan of how we can turn that into a positive.
Good. Okay. And just on that point about it being adopted by others, so there was a question, there's somebody in the chat talking about Canada who would like some information, so hopefully we'll be able to follow up on that. The Cayman Islands are using it for disaster response, which is phenomenal. And I see somebody's using it for a local scout group. So it just shows the diversity of application across the breadth of our world. Okay, so I just want to cover off the last question from our advanced questions. So it just shows the merits of bringing your questions in early, because you get to definitely to answer them. From Mia Temple, who works for Shropshire Fire and Rescue Service. And this is still about the sort of scope of JESIP around, she's concerned about fire protection officers. So the ones that work on the business side, so thinking about building safety, that when there's an incident, should commanders consider alerting those so they know what's happening in that building? So just wondered if you had a view on that, around how you integrate other bits of services who aren't necessarily about that frontline incident response. Chris?
I think it's a good reflection of the sort of entire point that we're making really around JESIP. Is it's not just for major incidents. This is about thinking when you're taking decisions about what the impact is on others, and that could be within your own service equally as much as it could if this circumstance was to arrive. If police were putting a closure order on a property, I would suggest that they should be thinking about what the impact on other services are and sharing information. And it goes back to the original JESIP principles. There are plenty of circumstances outside of this one where we share information on a daily basis for a safeguarding basis or for other reasons. And JESIP, the entire point is it's scalable. This is not just about major incidents. This is about everyday use. So we would encourage people to be making use of it in that context as well.
Okay, thank you for that. And another question. So Chris, I'll come to you on this one, which is around frontline security, how they could be more involved to help support JESIP. Now, I'm going to take this as a kind of almost Martin's Law question in terms of those people who are working in venues, different sizes, who may be confronted with an incident and need to be prepared. So that's the premise of Martin's Law, named after Vegan Murray's son, Martin, who campaigned heavily to get this legislation through. So I wonder, should we be talking to those security providers? And interestingly, David Boyle, your predecessor, has just gone to work for a security firm. So how do we bring them on board so that they are integrated at that very, very, very start of an incident before anybody else arrives? Matt?
So I would probably turn it back on them and say that they've got the awareness of this. They've got the awareness of Martin's Law, and say where our website is, there's a really good bit of self-learning on there around JESIP. And if you're interacting regularly with your other emergency services, if you're a security stadium or whatever, you'll be having exercises, you'll be doing training with them. So again, get with them, but there's some self-learning packages out there that the JESIP principles they're not difficult concepts to grasp. And I think if you were to use, or if those security staff were to use free web-based e-learning package, then they would get the principles and understand how we as emergency responding agencies are going to act when we turn up. But equally in the planning of where you work in those if those buildings or places where Martin's Law is going to work, there'll be exercises, there'll be training, there should be opportunities to understand how the JESIP response will roll out when it happens. And again, you go back to the thing that all those places have, and I think of my time when I've done stadia events from the ambulance service background, there are small events and small incidents which happen in those events, use that as your JESIP opportunity to go around the joint decision-making model, do that with the other people there so that muscle memory builds, so that come the awful day of the bigger job, it's muscle memory. You don't have to think so much about it because you know what's going to happen.
Yes, there's a couple of things come to mind as you're talking. One is around the guidance that needs to come out around Masters, which still isn't available as far as I know, and the role of the Security Industry Association. Are you talking to them about this?
So we are involved with the rollout of Martin's Law. Is probably all I can say is that the Home Office have made sure that we are involved in that, and colleagues and myself are part of that team looking at how that will happen. Yeah.
Great. And the second point I wanted to make, that I wrote last week on Emergency Services Times about exercise Cerberus, which was done in the Northeast throughout last year, a time in where Fire and Rescue Service spoke to me, Peter Heath and Stuart Nicholson from the Chief team, and they talked a lot about JESIP. They talked about how it's been used. They talked about, they was based in the sports stadium. They talked about security. It was like reading a JESIP manual. So I think if anybody's interested in reading that story, it's on the website if you want to go and have a look, just to see how it kind of works in practice and that training exercising scenario as well. So I'm afraid we are coming up to the end of the time. I've missed out some of my questions, but I have got to all the ones from our viewers, so that's good. I'm afraid there are currently still 31 questions waiting for us. I'm afraid I can't get to them all, but I've done my best to try and whiz through them and integrate them into our conversation. So thank you for joining us with your questions. Before I let you go, Chris and Matt, I'm going to ask you to let us have one piece of advice for our viewers this afternoon. So we've tripped through an awful lot of things, through the comms, through the incredible range of acronyms, through inclusion, through learning. I mean, it's been a fascinating and very sort of wide-ranging conversation. But if we were going to ask them to go and have one chat about one thing, what would it be? So let's start with you, Chris. What was your one piece of advice?
I think the thing I'd probably come back to is that point about this isn't just for the big jobs. If you're going to embed JESIP, make sure you embed it every day and make it muscle memory. We don't want it to be an add-on or something to think about when there's a major incident. This is something for everyday use. So please use it.
Get to know your responding colleagues in peacetime. It's so much better to go and have a coffee and do an exercise with, I can think of my colleague, literally I've got someone called Karen who's a fire officer. I've got Roy who's a police officer. We know each other. We've had coffee together. We've done training together. Do all that because I know when one of them picks up the phone to me, I know who they are. They're friends and colleagues, and it's much better to respond with a friend and colleague than respond again. Have to meet a stranger, for want of a better word, in a high stress situation and try and work out how they're gonna do things. So get to know your responding colleagues. Buy them a coffee, even a donut, get some there, even better, and make friends with them. It will make your response go 100 times easier than if you have to get to know people on the day.
Brilliant. And you have very cleverly taken me back into one of the questions I was going to ask you earlier, which is where Chris had said to me in the briefing that you should have that familiarity and that it should be nice to see you, not who are you, which is very apt, I think. So thank you for bringing us back to that as well as your piece of advice. And Chris, for reinforcing muscle memory, which is one of my favourite phrases from today, about making sure that it's just the way it is. It's what you do. So great advice from you both. Thank you so much for sparing time to talk to us this afternoon, sharing the world of JESIP. You can see from the number of registrations, from the number of questions, how much interest there is, and that your work is cut out. You still have to keep on going around talking to people, doing all your great work. So thank you very much. Thanks for listening. If you haven't already, do check out the Q&A episode where we talked about all things ESN. The Emergency Services Network continues to be of huge interest across the sector, and the team gave us some great insights during a webinar broadcast on 15th of January. You can access all our webinar recordings on our website. In the meantime, be sure to share, like, and if you haven't already, subscribe to For Every Response, a podcast from Emergency Services Times.